9/17 January 5, 1940. Raate Road, east of Suomussalmi, Finland. The temperature is below -30 degrees Celsius, and the forest is so dense that a man can disappear 10 meters off the road. A 12-man Finnish ski detachment lies flat behind a low snow berm, just off the packed track. Their leader is Corporal Eino Ranta, 26 years old, a reservist pulled back into uniform a month earlier. He wears a white oversuit over a wool tunic, and he keeps his face down to stop his breath from hanging in the air. In his mittens, he grips the pistol grip of a Suomi KP/31 submachine-gun. It weighs 4.6 kilograms, heavy for a winter patrol, but it is the one weapon in the Finnish inventory that can turn a close-range ambush into a wall of lead. Ranta's orders are simple and brutal. Stop the column. Not destroy it. Not engage the enemy. Stop it long enough for other Finnish units to carve it apart. Out on the road, the Soviet 44th Rifle Division is trying to force men and supplies through a corridor of snow and trees. The Finns have been doing the same thing for weeks, cutting the road into pieces, turning a moving formation into isolated pockets, Motti, then reducing them one by one with cold, hunger, and sudden close-range attacks. The method is not romantic. It is arithmetic. Ranta has picked his kill zone at a bend where the road skirts a shallow bog. The snow is deep off the packed surface. If vehicles stop here, they will not easily go around. 10 meters behind the road, his men have scraped firing niches into a drift and laid skis flat so they can launch immediately. The detachment has 6 Suomi KP/31s, each with a mix of 36 round box magazines and drum magazines. The drums hold far more rounds, but they are heavier, slower to reload, and more prone to issues if ice gets into the feed lips. The other men carry bolt-action rifles and one light machine gun with spare barrels wrapped to keep metal from freezing skin. At 9:19, the first sound arrives, a low, uneven rumble. It is not engines, at least not yet. It is boots and sled runners. The column is close. Ranta does not raise his head. He watches through a narrow slit in the snow. He sees the lead Soviet elements first as movement, dark shapes against a white road. No white oversuits. No snow capes. Men in heavy coats, clustered tight for warmth, carrying rifles with bayonets fixed because the front line has taught them that Finnish attacks come at knife distance. Behind them come more shapes. A lot more. This is the problem the Finns face across the Winter War. The Soviet Union can put hundreds of men on a road where Finland can spare dozens. The Finns answer with terrain, darkness, and speed. Ski troops can move off-road where trucks cannot. In a forest like this, a road is not a convenience. It is a funnel. At 9:22, Ranta gives the first hand signal, a tight fist, then 2 fingers, hold fire. At 9:23, he signals the left team to shift 5 meters. They slide on their stomachs, slow, careful, no sudden movement that will shine as a dark smear on snow. The plan is not to kill the entire Soviet force. The plan is to freeze it in place. A Suomi KP/31 fires 9 by 19 mm parabellum pistol ammunition at a cyclic rate that can reach roughly 750 to 900 rounds per minute, depending on ammunition and condition. In the open, it is not a long-range weapon. In a forest ambush at 30 to 60 meters, it is devastating. Ranta knows that if he waits until the road is crowded, until the Soviet point, main body, and supporting elements compress into the bend, then his 12 men can create the illusion of a much larger force. At 9:24, the Soviet lead file enters the bend. At 9:25, the road is filled with bodies, marching, shuffling, slipping. Ranta counts to 10. He wants the center of mass. At 9:26, he squeezes the trigger. The Suomi bucks into his shoulder. The sound is not a single crack, it is a fast, hard ripping noise. He fires in short bursts, not because he is calm, but because he has learned the gun's rhythm. Long bursts climb. Short bursts kill. 2 other Suomis open up in the same second. Then 3 more. The forest on both sides of the road comes alive with muzzle flash, brief, sharp, and quickly muffled by falling snow. Soviet soldiers drop, but just as important, the road locks. The men behind slam into the men ahead. Those who try to dive off the road sink into deep powder and struggle to move. At 9:27, the Soviet point tries to form a firing line. They cannot. There is no space. At 9:28, someone shouts an order in Russian. Another voice screams back. At 9:29, a Soviet light machine gun rattles from somewhere near the middle of the column, firing blind into the trees. Ranta's detachment does not stay still. That is the part outsiders miss when they imagine an ambush. The Finns do not lie in one trench and trade bullets. They fire, shift, fire again, and shift again. Ski troops can break contact in seconds. If they don't, a larger force will simply bring up heavier weapons and grind them down. At 9:30, Ranta crawls 3 meters right, jams a fresh magazine into the Suomi, and fires again at silhouettes moving toward the ditch. He aims at legs. A man who cannot walk cannot charge. A man who cannot charge cannot force the forest line. The Soviet formation reacts the way most large formations react in a choke point. It tries to push through. At 9:31, officers and NCOs start forcing men forward with shouts and kicks. At 9:32, the column surges, then stalls again as the front ranks meet bodies and fallen sleds. This is where the 12 versus 500 story becomes real, not as a fair fight, but as geometry. 500 men on a forest road cannot deploy like 500 men in a field. They become a long, thin organism with a fragile spine. Break the spine in 2 places, and the organism becomes separate parts. That is the entire logic of Motti: isolate, starve, reduce. At 9:33, Ranta sees the first Soviet attempt to flank, 10 men stepping off the road to the right. The moment their boots leave the packed snow, they sink to their knees. They are wearing heavy winter gear, carrying rifles, and some have bedrolls and mess kits strapped outside their packs. Every extra kilogram matters in powder snow. Ranta gestures once, 2 fingers, then a cut across the throat. The right side Suomi gunner shifts aim and fires. The flanking attempt collapses before it moves 10 meters. At 9:35, the Soviets begin firing rifle volleys into the treeline, hoping volume will solve what maneuver cannot. Splinters snap off branches. Snow dust shakes down from pine boughs and sprays across the Finns' white suits. One of Ranta's men takes a round through the upper arm. He does not scream. He clamps it and keeps his face down. At 9:37, Ranta hears a different sound: metal clanking, an engine turning over, then stopping. The column's rear elements are bringing vehicles up, or trying to. If trucks are now pinned behind the infantry, the road will jam harder. That helps the Finns, but it also signals escalation. If the Soviets can get a heavy machine gun forward, or a mortar, the forest edge will become lethal. At 9:40, the firefight pauses for half a beat, both sides reloading, both sides trying to locate targets in a blur of trees and snow. Ranta uses that moment to do what a small unit leader must do in a fight against a force 40 times his size. He decides whether to stay. Staying means more casualties. Staying too long means encirclement. Leaving too early means the column recovers and pushes through. At 9:41, he makes the call: 2 more minutes of fire, then break contact to the fallback line. He signals. One man pulls a cord attached to a small charge set into a snowbank at the road's edge. Not a giant blast, but enough to throw snow and debris into the bend and make the Soviets think mines are present. The psychological effect matters. At 9:42, the Suomis erupt again. Short bursts, controlled, brutal. At 9:43, the Soviets answer with heavier fire. A machine gun finds a lane and chews through branches. The Finns feel the rounds snap overhead. At 9:44, Ranta hears the sound he was hoping not to hear this close. A deep, slow clatter, tracked movement, coming up the road behind the infantry. It is not just men now. It is armor, or at least a tracked tractor pulling something heavy. Ranta's detachment has no anti-tank guns. They have rifles, grenades, and the cold. If armor reaches the bend and starts spraying the forest with machine gun fire, 12 men can vanish, if they move immediately. At 9:45, Ranta shouts the withdrawal order. Low, sharp, 2 words. The Finns do not stand. They slide back, snap skis on, and push into the trees at an angle that keeps them off the road and out of the Soviet line of sight. The last man to leave fires a final burst from a Suomi drum, fast, loud, meant to cover movement and by seconds. They disappear into the forest. Behind them, 500 Soviet troops are still on the road. They are still bunched, still confused, still pinned by the idea that Finns are everywhere. And that is the real effect of the ambush. The column has stopped, even if only for a short window. Ranta drives his skis forward through powder snow, aiming for the next choke point, because the job is not finished. Not even close. 9:52, January 5, 1940. 1 kilometer north of the road, the forest opens into a shallow ridge line. The Finns crest it on skis, single file, keeping intervals so one burst cannot take 2 men. Corporal Eino Ranta glances back only once. He sees no pursuit yet, just the dull echo of gunfire behind them, muffled by trees and snowfall. They reach the fallback position at 9:57, a narrow cut between 2 stands of pine where the ground rises and forces anything on the road to slow. Here, the snow is wind-packed. The Finns can move. The Soviets will still sink if they try to leave the track. Ranta drops to one knee, digs his mitt into his jacket, and checks the magazines. His fingers are clumsy. Metal is deadly in this cold. A bare touch can tear skin. The Suomi's receiver is already rimed with frost. The gun works because it is simple and because the Finns have learned what winter does to machinery. Too much oil thickens, too little invites wear. They run weapons nearly dry, wiping and cycling them constantly, because a frozen action is a death sentence. At 10:01, the first Soviet elements appear again, not as a tight crowd this time, but as a cautious point group. They are probing forward after the sudden stop. Behind them is noise, shouted orders, engines revving and dying, sled scraping. The column is trying to restart while its leaders figure out what hit them. This is the phase Finnish doctrine is built for. Attack the point, make them halt, withdraw before the response becomes organized, and do it again. The Finns cannot fight a 500-man formation head-on. They can break its tempo until it consumes itself. At 10:03, Ranta's left rifleman spots movement off the road, another flanking attempt, wider this time, maybe a platoon strength. The Soviets have learned the first lesson. Staying on the road means being shot. Now they try to move into the woods. The woods punish them. A Soviet soldier in a greatcoat can carry 25 to 30 kilograms of gear, rifle, ammunition, entrenching tool, food, spare clothing, sometimes a blanket or shelter half. In deep snow, that load is a chain. Ski troops with lighter packs can glide where others must wade. At 10:05, Ranta makes a decision. Instead of firing immediately at the road again, he pivots the detachment to face the flanking force. He wants to break the flanking attempt before it grows teeth. He signals 2 Suomi gunners forward, 10 meters, staying behind trees. They take positions with clear lines through the understory. Ranta keeps the light machine gun in reserve. He wants it for the moment Soviet troops try to rush. At 10:07, he fires first, 3 bursts, aimed low, catching the lead Soviet men as they struggle through powder. They fall and disappear into snow like stones into water. The flanking group stops, then bunches. The moment they bunch, the Finns' problem becomes manageable again. At 10:09, the other Suomi gunners open up, not as a continuous spray, but in disciplined bursts, 10 rounds, pause, 10 rounds. The rhythm is intentional. It sounds like multiple guns from multiple directions. It suggests a larger force than 12 men. By 10:12, the Soviet flank is stalled, pinned in the snow, unable to locate targets in white camouflage. The Finns are not invisible, but at 10 to 30 meters in a winter forest, a man in white with his face down is hard to see until he fires. Even then, the muzzle flash is brief, and the sound bounces between trunks. At 10:14, the Soviet column on the road hesitates again. The flanking attempt failing means the road remains the only route. That means the column remains a line, not a formation. And that is when the next layer of the Finnish plan arrives. 10:17, January 5, 1940. A single Finnish runner reaches Ranta from the rear, skiing hard, breath pumping, cheeks white with frostbite. He does not stop. He slides in, kneels, and delivers a message in clipped words. A larger Finnish force, company-sized, has cut the road further east. Another unit has struck the Soviet rear. The 44th Rifle Division is being cut into segments again. Ranta's 12 men are not alone. They are one cog in a machine built around a single principle: prevent the enemy from moving and supplying itself. This is the operational context the 12 men stopped 500 story depends on. Not one heroic stand, but a coordinated pattern of disruption. In December 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland with overwhelming numbers and equipment, expecting a quick collapse. The Finns, outnumbered and short of heavy weapons, responded with mobility, concealment, and road interdiction, especially in the forested north where Soviet units were forced onto narrow routes. The battle around Suomussalmi and the Raate Road became the clearest example. Soviet formations were drawn deep, stretched, then broken. The Suomi KP/-31 becomes central here for a reason. A bolt-action rifle dominates open ground. In a close-range forest fight, a submachine-gun lets a small team deliver sudden, concentrated fire, particularly at the moment the enemy tries to push through a choke point. The Suomi's strength is not range, it is volume at decisive distance. At 10:21, Soviet fire intensifies. They have brought a heavier weapon forward, likely a Maxim or similar heavy machine gun mounted on a sled or improvised platform. The bursts are longer now, deeper, less frantic. The rounds cut the forest in a more methodical pattern. Branches explode. Bark flakes off trunks. A Finnish rifleman takes a splinter across the cheek. Blood freezes almost immediately. Ranta knows what comes next. When a larger force cannot see its target, it floods the area with fire, then pushes in behind it. It is crude, but it works if the defender stays put. At 10:24, he orders a lateral shift. The detachment moves 20 meters left, skiing low, using the ridge's contour. They leave behind no footprints on the road, only scattered powder in the trees. The Soviets keep firing into the old positions for a full minute. The Finns are already gone. At 10:27, Ranta strikes again, this time at the road. He waits until the Soviet point group steps into the new kill lane. He fires 2 bursts into the center of the formation, then immediately shifts fire to the rear. The intent is not just to kill. It is to make the road feel like a trap from end to end. At 10:28, the light machine gun opens, short controlled bursts, aimed at the road surface. Rounds kick up snow and sparks. Men drop prone. Sleds tip. A horse, if there is a horse, would be useless here. In this cold and terrain, it is mostly manpower and vehicles. At 10:31, the Soviet point tries to withdraw. It cannot withdraw cleanly because the rear is crowded. The road clogs again. The pressure builds behind the front ranks. The entire column is forced into another stop-start cycle. This is how 12 men stop 500. They do not annihilate them. They take away the enemy's ability to maintain forward motion. By 10:34, Soviet officers are trying to impose order with whistles and shouted commands. Some troops begin firing wildly into the woods. Others hold fire, trying to conserve ammunition. There is tension inside the Soviet unit now, not just fear of the Finns, but frustration with their own paralysis. At 10:37, Ranta sees something that changes the threat picture. A small group of Soviet troops carrying long tubes and baseplates, mortars. If those mortars set up and start dropping rounds into the forest edge, the Finns will bleed fast. He does not debate. At 10:38, he orders his two best skiers to swing wide and hit the mortar team from the side. They go. 2 men. White suits. Suomi and rifle. They glide through trees, keeping distance, moving around the Soviet focus. They are not trying to be brave. They are trying to be unseen. At 10:43, they fire, sudden and close. The mortar team collapses. The baseplate drops into snow. The tube tilts, useless. One Soviet soldier tries to run back toward the road and is cut down by a Suomi burst at 15 meters. At 10:45, Ranta pulls his detachment back again. He has achieved what he needed: another delay, another interruption, another spike of fear and confusion. The Soviet column is still on the road. It is still not moving cleanly. And elsewhere, other Finnish units are cutting, encircling, and reducing pockets. 11:02, January 5, 1940. Ranta reaches a small Finnish command post in the woods, nothing formal, just a dugout under spruce boughs, with a map board nailed to a tree. A lieutenant points at the Raate Road on the map with a pencil stub. Segments are marked in pencil circles. Each circle is a pocket, Motti, and each pocket is a problem the Soviets cannot solve once their supplies run out. Ranta reports in short sentences: enemy stopped twice, flank attempt broken, mortars disrupted, 2 wounded, ammunition low. The lieutenant nods once. He does not praise. He does not dramatize. He only says what matters operationally: good. Keep them pinned. The main force is moving to close the next cut. Ranta checks his men at 11:08. Frost has whitened eyebrows and lashes. One man's glove is soaked with blood and already stiff. Another has a tremor in his hands from adrenaline and cold. No one talks about fear. They talk about magazines, routes, and the next firing position. At 11:16, they move again, 12 men on skis, slipping through a frozen forest, hunting a road that a larger army cannot leave. The Soviet column is still there. 500 men, trapped in a corridor of snow and trees, being turned into separate pieces by an enemy they can barely see. And the day is not even half over. 11:41, January 5, 1940. The sky is flat gray. Snow falls in a thin, steady sheet that erases tracks within minutes. Ranta's detachment moves in a staggered line through the pines, following a compass bearing and a faint rise in terrain that will bring them back toward Raate Road without exposing them on open ground. At 11:58, they stop in a shallow depression. Ranta pulls his map from inside his tunic so the paper stays flexible. A pencil mark shows the next road cut. Another Finnish unit has felled trees across the track about 2 kilometers east. If the Soviets are still stalled, they will compress again at that obstacle, bunching vehicles and infantry into a tight knot. That knot is where small units can do disproportionate damage. At 12:06, the forest begins to vibrate, this time with engines. Not the scattered starts and stops from earlier, but steady power. The Soviets are trying to push tracked vehicles forward, using them like battering rams to restore movement. Ranta does not have anti-tank rifles. He does not have a gun that can punch armor. What he does have is time, snow, and a road that cannot be widened. At 12:11, the detachment reaches a position overlooking the track from 15 meters back in the trees. Through branches, Ranta sees the lead Soviet vehicle, a track tractor or light tank, moving slow, its track teeth biting packed snow. Behind it, trucks sit bumper to bumper, exhaust plumes rising like smoke columns. Infantry cluster around the vehicles for warmth and perceived safety. Ranta studies the pattern and picks a target that matters more than armor: drivers and radiators. If the lead vehicle is immobilized, everything behind it becomes a stationary pile. At 12:14, he assigns tasks with brief gestures. 2 riflemen shift to the right to cover the ditch line. The light machine gun, kept dry, spare magazine wrapped, takes a low position with a clear lane onto the road. The Suomi gunners spread so their muzzle flashes won't all come from one point. At 12:17, a Finnish sapper team arrives from the left. 3 men, faces raw with cold, carrying axes and a coil of wire. They are not part of Ranta's 12, but they slot in as if they trained together, because the tactic repeats across the front. The sappers begin working immediately, 20 meters behind the Soviet lead element, felling a tree to drop across the road and seal the rear. The sound of chopping is small, but in a winter forest it travels. They work fast. By 12:23, the rear block is set. The Soviet column now has an obstacle in front and behind. It is not a perfect trap. The Soviets can cut trees too, but it costs time, and time is what the Finns are buying with blood. At 12:26, the Soviets reach the forward cut. The lead-tracked vehicle noses into branches and logs. It pushes, track clattering, then stops. Men climb onto the logs with axes and saws. An officer points and shouts. The column compresses again. Ranta waits until the road is fully jammed. At 12:29, he fires. 6 Suomis rip through the silence in staggered bursts. The light machine gun joins in, hammering the center of the mass. Ranta aims at the cab of a truck. The windshield spiderwebs. The driver slumps. The truck rolls forward half a meter and stops. At 12:30, Soviet infantry react with panic and instinct. Some dive under vehicles. Some try to return fire into the trees. Some attempt to rush the logs at the front, believing the Finns are concentrated there. They are not. The Finns are on both sides, firing from multiple angles, using snow berms and trunks as cover. A Suomi's advantage here is not just rate of fire, it is that it allows a man to keep his head down, fire fast, then shift without having to expose himself for careful aiming. At 12:33, Ranta sees the Soviet tracked vehicle's commander hatch crack open. A head appears, scanning, trying to locate muzzle flashes. Ranta fires a short burst. The head disappears instantly. The hatch slams shut. The vehicle begins to rotate its turret or mount, slow, searching. The sound of its machine gun starts, heavy and measured. It rakes the tree line. Snow and bark spray. The Finns flatten. This is the moment that decides whether the ambush becomes a massacre or a withdrawal. At 12:36, Ranta signals a break in contact to the left while continuing fire from the right. It's an old trick. Keep the enemy's attention on one flank while the other slides away. At 12:38, one of the sappers crawls forward with something in his hand. Glass bottle wrapped in cloth, the rag dark with fuel. A Molotov cocktail. In this war, it is not a symbol. It is a practical answer to metal. If thrown correctly, burning fuel can flood engine grills, ignite exposed lines, and force crews to button up or abandon vehicles. At 12:39, the sapper throws. The bottle arcs low and smashes against the side of a truck near the front of the jam. Fire blossoms across the hood and windshield, bright even in daylight. The truck's engine coughs. Smoke pours out. Men scramble away, some slapping at their coats. The fire does not need to destroy the whole vehicle. It only needs to add chaos and block the road. At 12:41, the Soviet-tracked vehicle fires again into the trees, but now its crew has a new problem: burning vehicles and panicked infantry clogging its path. The column's leaders are losing control. At 12:44, Ranta calls withdrawal. He does it earlier than some of his men want. He sees the pattern: Soviet mortars will return, heavier weapons will follow, Staying will mean being fixed and surrounded. The ambush has already done its operational work. The Finns pull back on skis, one by one, leaving behind a road jammed with wounded, burning fuel, and a formation that has once again lost its ability to move. 1318, January 5, 1940. Ranta's detachment reaches a new position on a narrow ridge overlooking a frozen stream that runs parallel to the road. The stream is hard ice with a dusting of snow. On skis, it's a highway. At 1327, they hear shouting and sporadic gunfire from the road. The Soviets are attempting a coordinated breakout from one of the pockets. The sound is different from earlier. It has direction. It has urgency. At 1331, a Finnish messenger arrives again, breath ragged. The message is short. A Soviet battalion-sized group is pushing west to reopen the road. If they succeed, the whole trap could loosen. Ranta does not have time to rest. His men have burned through ammunition. They have 2 wounded. They are cold and tired. But the only way this works, this entire method of fighting a larger army, is if the small units keep moving and keep striking the same artery. At 1344, they reach a bend where the road crosses the frozen stream via a narrow culvert. The terrain here is decisive, a steep bank on one side, open ice on the other. If Soviet troops try to rush across, they will be exposed on the streambed. Ranta sets his detachment on the bank at 1351. He assigns the light machine gun to cover the ice. He puts 2 Suomi gunners on the right to rake the road approach. He keeps himself slightly back, to watch and make the call to withdraw. At 1408, the Soviet breakout appears. They come fast, hundreds of men spread as much as the road allows, using the ditch line and the streambank, some stumbling onto the ice. They are not moving like a parade now. They are moving like men who know they will die if they stay where they are. At 1410, the Finns open fire. The machine gun hammers first, stitching the ice where boots slide and scramble. Men drop and skid. The Suomis follow, bursts aimed into the densest clusters near the road edge. The effect is immediate. The breakout wave fractures. The front ranks go prone. The rear ranks slam into them. The column compresses again, even as it tries to expand. At 1412, Soviet return fire intensifies. Rifles crack. A few automatic weapons join. Rounds hit the bank, snapping twigs and kicking snow into Finnish faces. One of Ranta's men takes a hit in the thigh and collapses behind a stump, teeth clenched so hard his jaw trembles. At 1415, the Soviets attempt to surge anyway. They push onto the ice in a rush, believing speed will carry them through. It does not. The ice is open ground. The Finns' fire is disciplined and close. This is where the Suomi's technical strengths matter again. In a confined space at short range, it allows a small defender to throw out enough rounds to break an assault without needing perfect marksmanship. The limitations are also real. Magazines run dry quickly, barrels heat, fingers fumble reloads in mittens. At 1417, Ranta's Suomi clicks empty. He drops behind cover, rips out the magazine, slams in another. His hands are slow. His breath burns his throat. He forces the bolt forward and fires again. At 1419, a Soviet group reaches the base of the bank, only 10 meters away. They are too close now for long explanations, too close for broad tactics. This becomes a short-range fight measured in seconds. Ranta throws a grenade downward at 1420. It lands in snow and detonates with a flat crack. Men fall back. A Suomi gunner fires a burst into the same spot, sweeping left to right. At 1422, the Soviet wave begins to break. It does not retreat cleanly. It collapses into cover, then pulls back in small clusters, dragging wounded. The breakout attempt has failed at this choke point, the same way it failed at the others. The road and the snow have forced mass into a narrow lane, and the Finns have turned that mass into a stoppage. At 1429, the firing fades. The Soviets fall back toward the pocket. The road remains closed. Ranta does not celebrate. He counts heads. He checks ammunition. He checks the wounded. By 1437, he has lost one man, killed by a rifle round that found its way through branches and cloth into the chest. The corpse lies in the snow, already freezing into stillness. There is no time for ceremony. They cover the body with a white sheet and mark the spot so it can be found later. At 1502, the detachment withdraws again, because staying invites mortars, and mortars do not care about courage. 1648, January 5, 1940. As the light begins to fail, Ranta skis toward the next position with a hollow feeling in his gut that does not leave. The day has been a chain of short, violent minutes separated by cold movement through trees. He has watched men die in seconds. He has watched hundreds of enemy troops stall, surge, and stall again, trapped by snow and fear and the absence of clear ground. He also knows what the numbers mean. 12 men did not defeat 500 on their own. They did something more specific, and in this war, more important, they prevented 500 from being 500 at once. They turned them into a line, then into a jam, then into pockets. At 1711, they reach a Finnish assembly point where other small detachments have gathered, faces gaunt, eyes red, hands wrapped. A captain speaks briefly. The Soviet pocket to the east is collapsing. Captured men are coming in without boots, without rifles, without food. The road is littered with abandoned equipment, burned trucks, frozen bodies. Ranta listens, silent. He is not thinking about victory. He is thinking about how close the day came to turning against them, how quickly a mortar team, a machine gun, or a single flanking move could have erased 12 men in white suits. At 1738, he finally sits, back against a tree, and checks the Suomi's action with trembling hands. He wipes ice from the receiver, clears a bit of grit, and cycles the bolt. It moves. The gun is still alive. He looks at his remaining men. 11 now. He memorizes their faces without meaning to. Because tomorrow, the road will demand the same thing again. 6:12, January 6, 1940. Dawn comes late this far north, and even then it is more gray than light. Ranta wakes with his boots still on. The inside of the dugout smells of damp wool, wood smoke, and cold metal. He sits up slowly because his muscles have stiffened overnight. Outside, the temperature has not improved. At 6:18, he checks his hands. The skin is cracked. His fingertips are numb. He flexes them until sensation returns in thin needles. Then he pulls the Suomi KP/-31 close and inspects it again. Magazine well clear, bolt face clean, barrel unobstructed. The weapon has become more than equipment. It is a promise. If the Soviets come within 50 meters, he can keep them back. At 6:34, a runner brings updated orders. The pockets along Raate Road are collapsing. The 44th Rifle Division has lost cohesion. Finnish units are tightening the ring around isolated groups, capturing men who can no longer fight and killing those who resist. The objective now is not just delay. It is reduction, the final stage of the Motti method. Ranta is ordered to take his remaining men to a junction east of the previous day's positions. A Soviet group has held out through the night with machine guns and a few vehicles still running. They are trying to break west before they freeze in place. At 7:21, Ranta's detachment skis out. The stream is their route again. Ice is fast. Forest is cover. They move with the same practiced silence, but the rhythm is different now. They are not improvising ambushes against an intact column. They are hunting fragments of a shattered formation. 8:02, January 6, 1940. They reach a ridge overlooking the road. Through a gap in trees, Ranta sees a scene that explains why this battle became a legend. Wrecked trucks, sleds half buried in snow, scattered crates, bodies in dark coats lying rigid beside the track. The Soviet unit has tried to keep moving and failed. The road is not a line of advance now. It is a graveyard. Ranta does not stare long. He looks for motion, not history. At 8:11, he spots it, a cluster of Soviet troops around a running vehicle, an engine coughing, exhaust plume thick. They are warming hands, trying to coax life from a machine that was never designed for this cold. Nearby, a heavy machine gun is placed facing west. The crew has piled snow around it as a crude berm. This is no longer 500 men. It is maybe 50 to 80, but it is still enough to kill a 12-man detachment if handled wrong. At 8:14, Ranta coordinates with a neighboring Finnish squad that has moved into position on the opposite side of the road. They do not use radios. They use runners and hand signals. The plan is simple: pin from both sides, force surrender if possible, kill if necessary. At 8:19, Ranta watches the Soviet machine gun team. The gun's silhouette is unmistakable: long barrel, heavy receiver, a weapon built for sustained fire. The crew is alert. They have learned something in the last weeks. The Finns strike suddenly and close. Ranta decides to strike first and strike hard. At 8:23, the Suomis open up. Ranta fires at the machine gun position in short bursts aimed at the crew, not the weapon. 2 men drop behind the berm. Another tries to crawl away and is cut down by fire from the opposite Finnish squad. The machine gun falls silent before it can build a firing rhythm. At 8:24, Soviet troops scatter toward vehicles and trees. Some throw down rifles and raise hands. Others fire back. The ones who fire back are the danger. They are the ones who still have discipline. At 8:26, Ranta sees a Soviet soldier lift a flare pistol. The man fires, and a red flare arcs into the gray morning. It is a call for help, or at least a signal to someone else in the pocket. Ranta's response is immediate. At 8:27, he shifts fire to the vehicle. He aims at the hood line and the driver's side. The windshield cracks. The engine sputters. Smoke thickens. The vehicle stops being an option. At 8:31, the firefight becomes a series of short, brutal moments. A Soviet soldier runs across the road and is hit mid-stride. A Finnish rifleman advances 5 meters, fires, retreats. Another Soviet man raises his hands and is pulled back by a comrade who refuses to surrender. At 8:35, Ranta hears an order in Finnish from the nearby squad leader: "Cease fire, take prisoners." The Soviet resistance is collapsing. The surviving men are too cold, too hungry, too surrounded. By 8:41, it is over. Finnish soldiers move in carefully, rifles up, muzzles steady. Soviet troops kneel with hands raised, some crying, some staring blankly. Many have frostbite on cheeks and fingers. Some have no gloves. Their boots are ragged. The fight has been decided as much by logistics as by bullets. This is the hidden truth behind the "stopped 500" claim. The winter war in the north is not only tactics. It is sustainment. Finland's small units can live off minimal supply in familiar terrain. Soviet divisions on a single road cannot. When that road is cut repeatedly, the cold becomes an enemy stronger than any rifle. 11:09, January 6, 1940. Ranta is finally pulled back from the road line. He has lost 1 man killed, 2 wounded, and he is exhausted in a way that does not show as shaking but as emptiness. He reports to a lieutenant again, same tree map board, same pencil circles, but fewer circles now. The pockets have shrunk. The Soviet presence on Raate Road is collapsing into surrender and scattered escape attempts. The lieutenant says, quietly, "They're done." Ranta does not answer. His mind is still at 1419 the previous day, at the bank over the ice, with Soviet troops 10 meters away. The body remembers what the mouth does not say. Broader view, what just happened, and why it mattered. By early January 1940, the fighting around Suomussalmi and the Raate Road had become a demonstration of Finnish operational thinking, avoid direct battle against superior mass, sever movement corridors, isolate enemy units into Motti pockets, then destroy or capture them piecemeal. Small ski detachments were not independent heroes. They were the cutting edge of a system: harassment, ambush, withdrawal, repeat, built around Finland's geography and winter conditions. Within that system, the Suomi KP/-31 earned its reputation. The gun's heavy build, controllability, and high rate of fire made it ideal for the exact kind of fighting the Finns were forcing: close-range engagements in forests, along roads, around vehicles, where the enemy could not deploy into full formation. Its use also fed a broader trend. Soviet forces had already experimented with submachine guns, but experiences in Finland reinforced the value of large-scale automatic fire for close combat, contributing to a stronger emphasis on SMGs in later doctrine and production. Evolution. What it did to Ranta at 1522 on January 6th, Ranta sits alone and cleans his weapon again. He does it because his hands need something to do and because the ritual anchors him. He thinks of the moment he chose to withdraw at 9:45 the previous day when tracked vehicles came forward. He thinks of the grenade at 14:20. He thinks of the man they covered with a sheet in the snow. He also thinks of something colder than fear: the realization that leadership here is not about bravery in the open. It is about timing, knowing when to fire, when to shift, when to leave. In the weeks that follow, Ranta is moved into a training role within his unit, instructing new ski troops on ambush setup, magazine management in extreme cold, and withdrawal drills under fire. He is not promoted because of a speech or a medal moment. He is promoted because his superiors understand what works in this war: men who can keep small units alive while they do hard work repeatedly. Aftermath. Beyond the Winter War ends in March 1940 with a peace that costs Finland territory but preserves its independence. The men who fought in the forests carry the experience forward. Some return to farms and workshops. Some stay in uniform as tensions continue. Ranta, like many reservists, returns to civilian life between conflicts, then is drawn back again when Finland fights the continuation war. He is older, more cautious, less willing to gamble on a perfect ambush if the withdrawal route is uncertain. He becomes the kind of NCO who trains others to survive rather than to chase glory. After the wars, men like him rarely write memoirs. They work. They raise families. They show up at unit reunions and do not describe what happened in the snow in detail, because the details are too sharp. Legacy. What the story changed: the legacy of actions like the Raate Road ambushes is not a single firefight. It is a lesson about asymmetric ground combat in harsh terrain. A smaller force can defeat a larger one by controlling movement corridors, exploiting concealment, and choosing engagement distances that maximize its weapons. The Suomi KP/-31 becomes one symbol of that lesson, proof that in close-range winter combat, controllable automatic fire can matter more than theoretical long-range power. In museums and histories, the numbers get repeated: 12 men stopped 500. The phrasing is dramatic, and it persists because it captures something true even if it compresses the context. In that snowy forest, the Finns did not need to match Soviet strength. They needed to deny it the ability to concentrate. And for hours at a time, at 9:26, 10:27, 12:29, 14:10, that is exactly what they did.